There is a kind of love that doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't always show up the way you expect. It's quiet, restrained, almost hidden behind walls that were built long before you ever arrived. And that's what makes it confusing. Because you can feel it, deeply. The energy, the pull, the unspoken connection. It's real. But at the same time, something feels off. Something feels distant. This is the kind of love that makes you question everything. If it's real, why is it so complicated? Because sometimes love isn't the problem. The heart is ready, but life, fear, timing, or past wounds stand in the way. And when that happens, you're left standing in the middle of something powerful, yet incomplete. This message is for the one who feels that love, but also feels the confusion. There is a kind of connection that doesn't feel ordinary from the very beginning. It carries a depth that is hard to explain, as if something unspoken already exists between two souls. It's not just attraction, not just interest. It feels heavier, more meaningful, almost like it matters more than it should this early on. And that's exactly where the complication begins. Because when emotions are this deep, they don't come freely. They come with layers, with weight, with consequences that not everyone is prepared to handle. In moments of closeness, everything feels effortless. Conversations seem natural. Eye contact holds more meaning than words, and even silence feels comfortable instead of awkward. There's a sense of being understood without having to explain too much. That kind of emotional safety is rare, and when it's felt, it creates a bond that goes beyond surface-level connection. But at the same time, that depth can become overwhelming. Because when something feels this real, it forces emotions to rise that have been buried for a long time. That's where the hesitation appears. Not because the feeling is lacking, but because it is too intense to ignore. Deep love has a way of exposing fears. Fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of getting hurt again. It asks for vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. And if someone hasn't fully healed from past experiences, that level of openness can feel more like a threat than a blessing. So instead of moving forward freely, there's a sense of holding back. There may be moments of warmth followed by sudden distance, a closeness that feels real, then a pull away that feels confusing. It's not because the connection isn't valued, it's because it is valued so much that it becomes scary. When something doesn't matter, it's easy to take risks. But when something feels important, every step feels heavier. Every decision feels more serious. This kind of love is not casual. It doesn't exist on the surface. It goes deep, and anything that goes deep requires emotional readiness. Without that readiness, even the strongest feelings can become complicated. Because the heart might be fully present, but the mind is still trying to protect itself. And that's the paradox of it all. The connection feels genuine, powerful, even rare, but it doesn't move in a simple, straight line. It moves with pauses, with uncertainty, with moments of doubt. Not because the love isn't real, but because real love often asks more from a person than they are ready to give in that moment. So what you're experiencing isn't something shallow or meaningless. It's actually the opposite. It's something deep that hasn't found its balance yet, something that exists, but is still trying to find a way to express itself without fear getting in the way. What creates the most confusion is not the absence of feeling, but the inconsistency of what is shown. One moment there is warmth, attention, and a sense of closeness that feels undeniable. The next moment there is distance, silence, or a sudden shift in energy that leaves you questioning everything. It feels like mixed signals, like something isn't adding up. But what you're witnessing isn't randomness. It's conflict happening beneath the surface. When emotions run deep, they don't just bring connection. They also bring everything that has been avoided, suppressed, or left unresolved. That's why the behavior can feel so unpredictable. There is a constant internal struggle between leaning into what feels right and pulling away from what feels risky. And when that struggle is strong, it shows up as inconsistency on the outside. In moments of closeness, the guard comes down. There's a natural expression of care, presence, and even vulnerability. It feels genuine because it is genuine. But after those moments pass, reality sets in. Thoughts begin to take over. Questions arise. Doubts appear. What if this goes wrong? What if this becomes something I can't control? What if I get hurt? These thoughts don't come from a lack of feeling. They come from a desire to avoid pain. So the energy shifts. Not because the connection has changed, but because fear has entered the space. And fear has a powerful way of overriding emotion, even when that emotion is strong. It creates hesitation. It creates distance. It creates a need to step back and regain a sense of control. This push and pull can feel like a cycle, moving closer when emotions feel safe, then pulling away when they start to feel overwhelming. It's not a strategy or a game. It's a defense mechanism, a way of managing feelings that are difficult to process all at once. And the hardest part is that from the outside, it doesn't always make sense, because you're responding to what is shown, while the real battle is happening internally, unseen. You feel the connection clearly, so when the behavior doesn't match that feeling, it creates confusion. You start to question whether it's real, whether it's imagined, or whether something has changed. But the truth is, nothing has changed in the feeling itself. What changes is the ability to handle that feeling. Some moments bring clarity and openness, while others bring fear and retreat. It's a fluctuation between emotion and protection. This kind of inner conflict often comes from past experiences that taught one thing, that getting too close can lead to pain. So even when something feels right in the present, the past still has a voice. And that voice creates resistance, even against something meaningful. That's why the actions don't always align with the emotions, because while the heart may be moving forward, the mind is still trying to hold back. And until those two are in alignment, the connection will continue to feel like it's moving in two directions at once, forward and backward at the same time. Sometimes the most difficult part of a deep connection is not what is happening between two people, but what is happening around them in real life. Timing plays a much bigger role than most people realize, because even when emotions feel aligned, life itself may not be ready to support what those emotions are trying to become. This creates a silent gap between what the heart feels and what reality allows. There are moments when everything feels right emotionally. The connection feels natural. The understanding feels effortless. And the bond feels like it has been there far longer than it actually has. But outside of those moments, there are responsibilities, personal struggles, emotional baggage, and unfinished chapters that cannot be ignored. These realities don't disappear just because a strong connection appears. Instead, they sit quietly in the background, shaping how much space someone has to fully invest in something new. When timing is not aligned, even genuine feelings struggle to grow. It's not about a lack of desire or interest. It's about capacity. A person might feel deeply, but still not have the emotional availability to act on those feelings in a stable way. They may be dealing with stress, healing from past wounds, or trying to figure out their own direction in life. And when someone is still finding balance within themselves, it becomes difficult to build something balanced with someone else. This is where confusion often enters. Because from the outside, it looks like everything should be moving forward. The connection feels strong enough, the bond feels real enough, and the emotional intensity feels undeniable. But internally, things are not aligned yet. So instead of progression, there is hesitation. Instead of consistency, there are pauses. Instead of clarity, there is delay. And delays can feel personal, even when they are not. It's easy to interpret distance as rejection or silence as lack of interest. But sometimes, delay is simply life saying, "Not yet." Not because the connection is wrong, but because the conditions for it to grow properly are not fully in place. Timing is not just about when two people meet. It's about when both people are actually ready to hold what that connection brings. There is also a deeper truth in timing. Growth cannot be rushed. Even if the feelings are strong, maturity, healing, and readiness take time. For something meaningful to survive long-term, it cannot be forced into existence before both people are stable enough to sustain it. Otherwise, even something beautiful can collapse under pressure. So what feels like complication is often just misalignment. Two people may be emotionally connected, but still walking through different seasons of life. One may be ready to move forward, while the other is still catching up to themselves. And until those seasons align, the connection exists in a space of potential rather than full expression. That is why timing can feel like a barrier even when love is present. Because love alone is not always enough to bring things into reality. It needs space, stability, and readiness from both sides. And when those elements are not yet aligned, even the strongest connection is forced to wait. One of the deepest reasons this kind of connection feels complicated is the presence of fear, especially the fear of losing emotional control. When someone begins to feel something powerful, something that reaches beyond surface-level attraction, it naturally creates a sense of vulnerability. And vulnerability for many people does not feel safe. It feels like stepping into unknown territory without protection, without certainty, and without guarantees. At first, everything may feel manageable. There is interest, there is curiosity, and there may even be moments of openness where emotions are expressed freely. But as the connection deepens, something begins to shift internally. The feelings start to carry more weight. It stops being casual. It starts feeling meaningful. And that is where fear begins to enter the picture. Because meaningful connection requires emotional surrender. It requires allowing someone to matter, allowing someone to influence your emotions, and allowing yourself to be seen in a more exposed way. For someone who has been hurt before, or someone who has learned to rely heavily on self-control, this surrender can feel dangerous. It is not that the connection is unwanted, it is that the level of emotional exposure feels too risky. So instead of fully stepping into that emotional space, a form of protection is activated. Distance is created, not necessarily through words, but through behavior. There may be moments of closeness followed by withdrawal. There may be warmth followed by silence. This isn't random. It is the mind trying to regain control when emotions start to feel overwhelming. Control becomes a form of safety. When someone feels they are in control, they feel protected from getting hurt. But deep emotional connection naturally challenges that control. It brings unpredictability. It brings attachment. It brings feelings that cannot always be managed or switched off easily. And that loss of control can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. So instead of allowing emotions to grow freely, boundaries are unintentionally created. Not because the connection lacks value, but because the intensity of it requires more emotional strength than what feels available in that moment. This is where confusion often appears on the outside, because the internal experience is not visible. To the outside world, it may look like inconsistency or mixed signals. But internally, it is a constant negotiation between heart and self-protection. One part wants closeness, wants connection, wants to explore what this bond could become. The other part wants safety, distance, and emotional stability. These two forces begin to pull in opposite directions, creating that push and pull dynamic. What makes this even more complicated is that fear doesn't always announce itself clearly. It doesn't say, "I am afraid." Instead, it shows up as hesitation, delay, distraction, or emotional withdrawal. It quietly influences decisions without being fully recognized. And the deeper the connection grows, the stronger this internal conflict becomes. Because the more something matters, the more there is to lose. And the more there is to lose, the stronger the desire becomes to protect oneself from potential pain. This is why emotional distance can appear even in moments of genuine connection. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of fear trying to manage something that feels too significant to handle freely. Even when everything feels uncertain on the surface, there is often something that continues to exist underneath it all. A quiet, unspoken connection that doesn't disappear easily. It doesn't always show itself through constant communication, consistent actions, or clear expressions of emotion. Instead, it lingers in subtle ways, almost like an invisible thread that still holds two people in a shared emotional space, even when distance appears. This kind of connection is not always loud or obvious. It doesn't need constant validation to exist. Sometimes it is felt more strongly in silence than in conversation. There can be moments when nothing is being said, yet everything still feels understood. A presence that is no longer physically or emotionally active in the same way can still feel emotionally close, as if something remains unresolved or unfinished. That lingering feeling often creates confusion, because logically, distance should mean disconnection. Silence should mean absence. But emotionally, it doesn't always work that way. There are experiences that leave an imprint, and when that imprint is deep enough, it doesn't simply fade just because circumstances change. It stays in memory, in emotion, and in energy. Even in separation, reminders can still appear in unexpected ways. A thought, a memory, a familiar feeling triggered by something small, all of these can bring back the emotional presence of someone who is no longer actively present. And when that happens, it can feel as if nothing has fully ended internally, even if externally things have shifted. This is why distance does not always equal disappearance. Some connections are built on emotional depth rather than routine interaction. And when something is felt deeply, it doesn't require constant reinforcement to continue existing in the mind and heart. It becomes part of emotional memory, something that is not easily erased or replaced. There is also an energetic aspect to deep connection. Even without communication, people can still feel a sense of awareness about each other. not in a physical sense, but in a subtle emotional awareness that something still exists between them. It is not always explainable, but it is often experienced. A sense of knowing that the connection is not completely gone, even if it is not currently active. This lingering presence can create inner conflict. On one side, reality shows distance. On the other side, emotions still recognize something familiar. And when these two experiences do not match, it creates a sense of emotional tension, almost like the heart and reality are not fully aligned. But what is important to understand is that lingering connection does not always mean action will follow. It does not guarantee reunion, clarity, or resolution. It simply means that something meaningful was experienced, something that left an imprint strong enough to remain even after circumstances changed. Some connections are not designed to be constant. They are designed to be impactful. They shape emotions, awareness, and understanding in ways that remain long after the moment has passed. And that is why, even in silence, something can still feel present. Not as something active, but as something remembered, felt, and quietly carried within. Not every deep connection is meant to move forward in the way the mind initially expects, and that is often the hardest truth to accept. When emotions are strong, the natural assumption is that they must lead somewhere. That intensity automatically means permanence. That depth guarantees direction. But reality does not always work in straight lines. Sometimes a connection enters a life not to stay in its original form, but to reveal something, awaken something, or change something internally before it ever becomes anything external. The real challenge begins when confusion is mistaken for destiny. When inconsistency is interpreted as fate trying to work things out, or when emotional intensity is taken as proof that something must eventually resolve into a relationship. But not all emotional experiences are meant to evolve into long-term outcomes. Some are designed to shift perspective, to break emotional patterns, or to expose parts of the self that were previously ignored. A meaningful connection can feel like it should continue simply because of how strong it feels. But strength of emotion is not the same as compatibility of timing, readiness, or life direction. Two people can genuinely feel something real, yet still not be aligned in a way that allows stability or clarity to exist. And when that misalignment continues, confusion becomes the dominant experience. This is where self-awareness becomes important. Instead of asking only, "Why is this happening?" there is a deeper question that needs attention. What is this experience showing internally? Because often, the emotional intensity is not just about the other person, it is also about what is being activated within. Old wounds, attachment patterns, fears of loss, or desires for validation can all surface through a connection that feels powerful. And when that happens, it becomes easy to lose emotional balance. Waiting, overthinking, analyzing every small action, and trying to decode meaning from inconsistency can slowly shift focus away from self-growth. The connection becomes the center of emotional life, even when it is not stable or clearly defined. But the truth is, a connection should not require constant confusion to feel meaningful. Growth does not always come from holding on tighter. It often comes from stepping back and understanding what role this experience is actually playing. Sometimes that role is not continuation, but transformation. It changes how love is understood, how boundaries are formed, and how emotional energy is invested in the future. Letting go of the idea that every deep feeling must become something permanent is not the same as denying its importance. It is recognizing that impact does not always equal destination. Something can be real, meaningful, and life-shifting without needing to become a lifelong story. And when that understanding begins to settle, clarity slowly replaces confusion. Not always immediately, not always easily, but gradually. Because emotional experiences are not just about who stays or who leaves, they are also about who you become because of what you felt. In the end, the purpose of some connections is not to be held forever, but to teach what kind of emotional space is truly healthy, balanced, and aligned for the future.